In every galaxy, there are probably signs we cannot read, warnings in languages we will never decode, barriers we will never see. Around Earth, spinning through space for 4.5 billion years, there might be one that says the same thing in a million different ways. Do not approach. Do not contact. Do not release. What if the silence of the universe is not empty? What if it is enforced? What if the reason no alien civilization has made contact is not because they cannot find us, but because they are under strict orders to leave us alone? Not out of respect, not out of indifference, out of fear. Because Earth is not just another planet with life. It is a quarantine zone, and we are the disease being contained. Right now, the Voyager probes are moving toward interstellar space at approximately 38,000 miles per hour. We celebrate them as humanity's ambassadors. But what if they are something else? What if they are escape attempts from a prison we do not know we are in? And what if something out there is watching them approach a boundary, waiting to enforce a containment that has been in place longer than our species has existed? The idea sounds like paranoia at first, but it becomes harder to dismiss when you start looking at the evidence. The Van radiation belts surround Earth. They were discovered in 1958. We are told they are natural and formed by Earth's magnetic field. But their structure is unusually precise. 2 concentric shells. These regions would destroy most electronics attempting to pass through them. The only life forms that have made it beyond them intact are humans, inside specially shielded capsules. Even then, only briefly. It raises a question. What if those belts are not entirely natural? What if they function as a barrier? Consider this. Every space mission that has attempted to go beyond Earth orbit has encountered unexpected problems. The Soviet Union ran a series of Mars missions during the 1960s and 70s. 16 missions were launched. 12 of them failed. NASA has had more success, but the failure rate is still significant. Roughly half of all Mars missions do not complete their objectives. We explain these outcomes by pointing to the difficulty of space travel. We blame harsh conditions, technical limitations, and human error. But there is another question we rarely ask. What if something does not want us to leave? If that idea sounds extreme, consider how human behavior might appear from an outside perspective. We are the only species we know of that commits organized violence against its own kind on a massive scale. We create weapons designed to maximize suffering. We damage our own environment while fully understanding the consequences. From a broader perspective, we might not appear as a typical intelligent species. We might appear unstable. Dr. David Brin, an astrophysicist, proposed a possibility that is difficult to ignore. He suggested that intelligence and aggression may not commonly evolve together. In many cases, a species that becomes intelligent may also become cooperative. Aggressive species might destroy themselves before reaching advanced technological stages. Humans may represent an unusual case. We are capable of advanced reasoning. At the same time, we remain capable of large-scale conflict. That combination may be rare. It may also be dangerous. And it is not just behavior that could be a concern. Human biology itself may present a risk. Humans carry a large number of viruses. Our immune systems constantly evolve in response to those threats. What we consider normal biological function could appear aggressive to organisms that evolved in more stable environments. History provides an example. When Spanish explorers arrived in the Americas, they brought diseases that had little effect on them but devastated populations with no immunity. Now imagine that effect on a much larger scale. If Earth life were introduced to another ecosystem, it could have consequences that extend far beyond a single planet. In 2009, researchers found bacteria from Earth that had survived for 18 months on the exterior of the International Space Station. Those organisms endured vacuum, radiation, and extreme temperature fluctuations. If life from Earth can survive those conditions, it raises another question. What limits would actually stop it? But there is another possibility to consider. The concern may not be limited to physical threats such as violence or disease. It may involve something less tangible. What if the risk is related to human thought itself? Human ideas spread quickly. Belief systems can reshape entire societies. Political ideologies can overturn governments. Economic systems can expand until they dominate global activity. We often describe these patterns as cultural transmission. In modern terms, we sometimes refer to them as memes. But what if this process is more than cultural? What if human patterns of thought are uniquely transmissible? What if they function in a way that could influence any intelligent system that encounters them? Every human culture has developed concepts that feel fundamental to us. Competition can be seen as a virtue. Suffering can be interpreted as meaningful. Conflict is often framed as progress. These ideas seem natural within human experience, but they may not be universal. They could represent a specific cognitive framework that developed only on Earth. If that framework were introduced to other forms of intelligence, it might not integrate safely. Some researchers who have studied remote perception have reported a recurring description. They describe a boundary around Earth that is not physical in the conventional sense. According to these accounts, the boundary functions more like a containment field for information or consciousness. They describe the presence of entities positioned at that boundary, not to prevent physical escape, but to limit the transmission of signals. If those reports were accurate, the purpose would not be to keep us inside. It would be to prevent something from spreading outward. The timeline raises additional questions. Approximately 4 billion years ago, Earth was a typical rocky planet. Then life emerged and spread rapidly. It altered the atmosphere. It occupied nearly every environment. It developed increasing complexity over time. The rate of that development appears unusually fast when compared to theoretical models. If the conditions that led to this outcome were intentional, Earth could serve a specific role. It could function as a controlled environment for biological or cognitive systems that require containment. This perspective also changes how we interpret the Fermi paradox. The absence of visible extraterrestrial activity is often interpreted as evidence that advanced civilizations are rare. But there is another explanation. A quarantine system would not receive communication. A disciplined network of civilizations would avoid any interaction that could compromise containment. From that perspective, silence is not emptiness. It is policy. If that is the case, then the absence of contact may not be a mystery. It may be a precaution. And there may be good reason for it. In the past century alone, humanity has developed technologies with the potential for large-scale impact. Nuclear weapons, biological engineering, artificial intelligence, and advanced computing systems. These developments have occurred within a relatively short period of time. From a broader perspective, that rate of advancement may appear unpredictable. If a civilization were observing from a distance, it might interpret that trajectory as unstable. It might also consider the potential consequences of contact. Exposure works in both directions. If we reached outward, we would encounter environments and systems we do not understand. At the same time, anything that encountered us would be exposed to our biology, our technology, and our patterns of thought. Containment would reduce risk for both sides. This idea can also be applied to current observations. In 2023, several unidentified objects were detected and intercepted over North America. Public information about these events was limited. Descriptions were controlled. Debris was not widely shared. Official statements avoided clear conclusions about origin. One interpretation is that these objects were unknown surveillance platforms. Another interpretation is that they were monitoring systems. If Earth were part of a containment zone, regular observation would be expected. Maintenance would also be expected. Barriers require monitoring. Any structure designed to limit movement or communication would need oversight. From that perspective, unidentified aerial phenomena could represent localized checks on the integrity of that system. The historical record contains additional anomalies. In 1977, a radio signal was detected that appeared structured and non-random. It lasted 72 seconds and was never observed again. It has been referred to as the wow signal. Its origin has not been confirmed. If interpreted within this framework, it could represent a transmission related to containment status. Not a message intended for Earth, but a report that included Earth. A system update. A confirmation that conditions remain unchanged. There is another way to interpret the situation, and it leads to a very different conclusion. The quarantine may not exist to protect others from Earth. It may exist to protect Earth from something else. Imagine a medical isolation unit. Patients inside may believe they are being confined. In reality, the isolation is meant to prevent exposure to external threats. If Earth functions in a similar way, then the boundary is not a prison, it is a safeguard. Humanity may not be ready for what exists beyond it. Exposure to external environments could introduce risks that we are not equipped to handle. These risks could be biological, technological, or cognitive in nature. If that is the case, then the lack of response to human signals may not indicate absence. It may indicate restraint. Messages sent outward may be filtered. Responses may be blocked. A containment system would likely operate in both directions. If this interpretation is correct, then Earth may represent a controlled environment within a much larger and more active system. Life beyond that system could be widespread. It could be communicating, traveling, and interacting freely. Earth would remain isolated, not because it is unimportant, but because it is not yet compatible. From this perspective, the silence is not empty. It is maintained. If that interpretation is correct, then the future becomes uncertain in a different way. At some point, the conditions that justify containment may change. That change could occur because humanity becomes more stable, more predictable, and more capable of interacting without causing harm. It could also occur for the opposite reason. If a contained system becomes too unstable or too dangerous, containment may no longer be considered viable. In biological systems, containment sometimes ends with elimination. In controlled environments, failed experiments are terminated. If Earth were part of a system like that, there would be a threshold, a point at which continued containment is no longer an option. The question is not whether that threshold exists. The question is where it is, and whether we are approaching it. There is also a third possibility. Earth may not be a prison. It may not be a hospital. It may be a testing environment, a location where specific variables are allowed to develop under observation. If that is the case, then the lack of contact is not fear or protection. It is procedure. Observation without interference, a study that has been running for longer than human history. If that study has an endpoint, then the conclusion would not depend on what we believe about ourselves. It would depend on the criteria set by whatever established the system, and those criteria are unknown. If you consider all of these possibilities together, one pattern becomes clear. Isolation is not necessarily absence. It can also be intentional separation. The difference between those two interpretations changes how we understand everything that follows. If we are alone, then exploration is simply a matter of time and technology. If we are contained, then exploration may trigger consequences. Every advancement would carry additional risk. Every signal sent outward would be observed. Every attempt to cross a boundary would be noticed. From that perspective, progress is not just discovery, it is exposure. At some point, the system either opens or responds. Until then, the silence continues. If the possibility of cosmic quarantine has changed how you think about our place in the universe, there are other directions to explore. One possibility is that something may already be interacting with us in ways we do not recognize. Another is that our perception of time itself may not be consistent with reality. Both ideas suggest that the boundaries we assume are stable may not be as fixed as they appear. If you want to explore those possibilities further, you can continue with our investigation into consciousness farming. You can also examine the question of temporal displacement and whether we are experiencing the correct sequence of events. Subscribe for more analysis of systems that operate beyond direct observation. The next topic examines evidence that Earth may have been monitored long before recorded history. Until then, consider the possibility that the night sky is not empty. It may be structured, it may be controlled, and it may be waiting.